Let me go ahead and start the meeting. As I said, this meeting is on seismic safety of the Northwest Eugene bridges and overpasses. Uh, it's hosted by Ready Northwest Eugene, which is our organization. We are responsible for providing emergency preparedness information to 3 neighborhoods, Bethel, Santa Clara, and River Road. And we have a number of planners in our little group that have helped put this together. Joel Robe, Ed Farron, myself, of course, Joe Piccolotti, who is not here tonight, Bruce Sturmer, who may join us, and Carol Hicks. We are a group of volunteers. We can very much use help. So if you are so inclined to want to volunteer to join our group, that would be most welcome. Our mission is to share emergency preparedness information throughout our region and beyond, to prepare ourselves and our neighbors, to prepare ourselves and our neighbors to anticipate, survive, and recover from disasters. And if you just bear with me one more minute, I will hopefully be able to get this meeting.
Here you are.
Fully underway, yes. Sorry, I couldn't even find my image on this. It's quite something, a lot of activity. When we first thought about doing this meeting, we put down some of our assumptions as to why we wanted to talk about the subject. One assumption was that our community is susceptible to large earthquakes. And the second is that our existing bridges and overpasses, as we understand it, are not seismically engineered. Transportation access will be critically important in a disaster for us, for all of us to receive aid. Excuse me, could you please mute if you're, yeah, thank you. Transportation access will be critically important in a disaster for all of us to receive aid, supplies, or possibly to evacuate. Retrofitting our transportation infrastructure is important for our community emergency preparedness and resilience. And finally, the residents and citizens of Eugene, we need to know what the condition of our community infrastructure is, and also the plans that may be underway to improve that infrastructure. So we were so lucky when we moved ahead with the plans to have this presentation to get a really 2 really good speakers tonight. And the first is going to be Trish Sharma, who is a Eugene transportation planner. I found out through the conversations we have, has an extensive knowledge of emergency preparedness. And in fact, in her education, that was one of the emphases along with the transportation planning aspect. So that has been a tremendous help. The second presenter will be Sierra Anderson, who is our new emergency manager. And she'll be discussing emergency preparedness concerns related to this subject, and I'm sure much more. So, hold on.
Charles, see, one of the things we'd like to let people know is that just hold your questions to the end. We'll have at least 20 minutes for questions at the end, if everything goes the way we're planning anyway, and yes, possibly more.
Thank you. That's absolutely true. So first we'll be hearing from Trish, then from Sierra, and finally there'll be a big block of time for us to ask questions and get answers and have maybe a bit of discussion toward the end. So with that, if I could ask you again, just to stay muted if you're not speaking, that would help the presenters a great deal. Let's see, Trish, are you ready to get started in your presentation?
Yes, I am ready. Give me just 1
Okay.
second and I will go ahead and share my screen.
Great.
Another thing, that if people have questions, they want to type them into the chat, that'll help too, if you want to try to remember them.
Yes, I think that'd be great if everybody could just drop their questions in the chat and we can go ahead and address them towards the end of the presentation. But thank you, Chelsea, and I feel like we can get started. So today we're going to talk about the bridge seismic safety and emergency preparedness in Eugene. I am Trisha Sharma, and I'm a transportation planner with City of Eugene's transportation planning team. Been with the city a little over a year and a half, and just really excited to be here today with y'all. I also have Jordan Vesper, our civil engineer with the City of Eugene here, to address some of the concerns from the community, as well as Sierra Anderson, our emergency manager. So our agenda for today is briefly short. And again, I just want to say, if you have any questions, please wait for us to conclude the presentation and we will take them one by one at the end of the presentation. So the first slide, we're going to talk about seismic retrofitting and possible replacement of bridges in Eugene. So I just want to start by saying that ownership differences of the bridges in Eugene and the surrounding areas, including the urban growth boundary, always presents itself as a conflict when it comes to applying for funding or retrofitting or doing any other sort of structural improvements for the bridges. So I just want to conclude this slide by saying that while the City of Eugene and Springfield have been in the process of conducting seismic assessment of city-owned bridges, again, it's a very time-intensive and costly process. So we're trying to take steps in order to enhance emergency preparedness. Moving on to my next slide, I just want to say, sorry.
I'm not seeing the slides. Am I missing something? Or is everyone else seeing them?
I'm seeing them.
Okay, well, that's just, it's at my end. Okay, user error. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's totally okay. So the next slide, I'd like to talk about the seismic straining preliminary design process that the City of Eugene has been working on since the year 2020. So in 2020, we identified the list, as you can see on your screen. There are 10 bridges, and these were identified through a collaborative emergency preparedness effort with Lane County, ODOT, and I believe there was some involvement from the Lane County or the Lane Council of Governments as well. While none of these bridges have been seismically retrofitted as of today, the process is already in place. And if you have any questions about a particular bridge, feel free to go ahead and drop your questions in the chat and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So moving on to my next slide, I know there were questions about dam failures that might proliferate during a Cascadia event. And while there is no concrete information around dam failures in the past, this is basically a conclusion from the Lane County Emergency Management Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan that talks about and dams and their design standards being up to code as of today, while the extent of a Cascadia event cannot be foreseen as of today. There are processes and staff in place that are rigorously working towards filling any voids or gaps that might lead to a lapse of any of these dams. So moving on to my next slide, I would like to talk about project proposals and the approval process, and I will let Jordan Vesper go ahead and talk about that.
All right, thank you everyone for having us. Trish sent me over some of the questions before this. Y'all have good questions, very well thought through and making my brain scratch. So I appreciate having those and allowing us to present during this this meeting. So the way that we work through our process for determining which bridges that we're going to seismically retrofit or place. So it started with that documentation or the analysis that we did in 2020. And the original process was 30 bridges. And we had a evaluation criteria that included things like the type of road that it was on. So the classification of the road, the amount of traffic that goes over it, proximity to schools and emergency facilities, and basically islands. So if there were populations that would be isolated based on a bridge, we also used that as one of our criterias. And so from there, we worked towards this group of 10 bridges that we felt were the first round to get either seismically upgraded or replaced. So after we determined which bridges we were going to do, we presented this to the transportation management team and said, here's what we're thinking. Here's the total cost. Do you think this is a good idea? And they said, yeah, absolutely. We need to move forward. We need to start replacing these bridges, or we need to get them retrofitted. And from there, we present to a different group, which is the policy team, and they hold the money and distribute the money. And so we make the case of this bridge, this bridge should be replaced or retrofitted. And they acknowledge that, yeah, we agree. Let's move forward. So from there, I work with Trish and I work with our planners to find funding that will allow us to complete these projects. And so when we're working through these projects, we get about 90 cents on the dollar from the feds when we are able to be successful in a grant. And a lot of those have a match, and our bridge projects are anywhere from 4 million all the way up to, we have a couple that we're looking at doing that are in the 16 to $20 million range. So even a 10% responsibility by the city is still a significant amount of money that we're having to invest. So our goal is to do a bridge every couple years, and we're still trying to determine where that funding is coming from locally and how we continue to have sustained funding so that we can upgrade not only those 10, but then move into the next phase. What are the next ones that we're going to evaluate, and how are we going to upgrade these? It's not a short process. I will say that it's going to be years for us to get all of these bridges evaluated and determine the appropriate approach, whether it's replacement or retrofit, and then securing funding and getting the construction actually completed. But that is our typical process for going through, going from the concept of we need to evaluate our bridges to construction. Okay, it's been seismically upgraded and it's going to be fine in the event of a Cascadia event.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next slide. And with that, I would like to invite Sierra Anderson, our emergency manager, to take over. Thank you.
Are you maxing your computer volume?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I got a nod.
Yeah,
A nod.
yes.
See if I can get video. Oh, opposite. All right. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Sierra Anderson. I'm the emergency manager for the city of Eugene. in my position. Oh, could I ask everyone to make sure you're muted, please? Thank you so much. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone was muted because you get some weird feedback and it can be distracting. Yes, I'm the emergency manager for the city of Eugene. I've been with Eugene for just about 7 months now. It has been a very eventful 7 months, I will say. We've been very active and we now officially have a full team as of last week. So it's pretty exciting stuff happening over here in emergency management. But in order to keep the theme of the evening going, I will move on. So I do appreciate the in-depth scientific knowledge that our folks in Eugene have about bridge safety and kind of the barriers to some of the projects to protect our infrastructure here. But I think that we may be missing a pretty critical theme, and the theme being if we're focusing in on the Cascadia earthquake and not just a crustal earthquake, there are going to be some pretty significant impacts outside of what we like to think about as bridge safety. I took this excerpt out of the Oregon Resilience Plan from 2013. It was the last time it was updated in regards to the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. Now, you'll see a lot of this is focused on critical infrastructure and emergency management. We like to call these community lifelines. So the things that keep our society kind of running and going, so drinking water, emergency services, healthcare, police, electricity, power, water, all of that, water and sewer. And this is their estimated time to restore services after the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So I'm kind of trying to shift the focus of the conversation on, oh, if we could go back just for a second. I would like to switch the conversation from focusing in on our bridge infrastructure and our road infrastructure to what we can expect as far as impacts from the earthquake on the greater scale, right? So in emergency management, yes, the bridges are important, but there are other things that we like to think about and we have to think about. So we want to anticipate things like fuel shortages, hospital surge, structural damages, drinking water system damage, sewer system damages, food supply chain it will be heavily disrupted. The lack of ability to enforce laws, there's just no way to get around that. Increased number of hazmat incidents due to impacts from the earthquake, transportation system impacts, clearly like we're talking tonight on the bridges, and then widespread civil unrest. So those are the kinds of effects that we think about in emergency management and try to talk through some of the ways that we can help folks protect themselves, as well as how we can pre-plan for some of those impacts. Next slide, please, Tricia. So how does local government work to respond to these complex incidents? We work on plans. We work on our natural hazard mitigation plan that was referenced earlier for the county's plan, but the city of Eugene and Springfield, we have a combined natural hazards mitigation plan. We are actively working to update that. It should be done by 2025. The efforts that go into this, they're very great. It is a very technical plan. There's a lot that goes into our hazard vulnerability analysis. There is also a big piece of this project that is done to identify potential projects that can be related to grants or opportunities for funding outside of our tax dollars or what funds the city as an organization. The outreach and education and promotion. So what we're doing tonight, getting out here and talking to folks out in the community that have real concerns and give them an opportunity to ask questions to the subject matter experts like Tricia and the staff that she works with, or ask preparedness-based questions where I can help kind of glean and share some information on that. Oregon, the state of Oregon, every few years does a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake statewide exercise where local jurisdictions opt in to participate in this exercise. Yes, don't worry, City of Eugene did sign up to participate. It's changed its name. It was Cascadia Rising, and now it's going to be called Iron Ore 2024. I haven't quite ironed out, what we're going to be doing as far as what the goals are for that exercise just yet. We do have some time. It aligns with the Great Oregon Shakeout in October. I did put a couple of links in there in case if Tricia was able to share the slide, so you had some resources. Oregon Emergent Department, let's go back just for a second. Oregon Department of Emergency Management, they worked very hard to put together the 2 Weeks Ready campaign. And my personal favorite publication is the Living on Shaky Ground. There's a lot of really good preparedness information as it relates to Oregon in particular. I also think that the general kind of ready.gov preparedness items for home preparedness can be a really good resource as well. All right, next slide, please. So what can you do? I very much, and Charles C knows this about me, I very much believe in the power of empowerment, right? So giving people the tools to be able to work together in their small kind of micro communities out in the different neighborhoods, being able to look at that and say, okay, what can I learn and share with my neighbors? You can sign up for those mass notifications. So the lane alert system here, it's through a software called Everbridge. It's a statewide software that local government uses to alert their communities in times of emergency, and what to do, where to go, and any further information that local government can share with their community members. There is a new software from the USGS. It's called Shake Alert. I don't know how many folks on the call have heard of that. It's a relatively new software, but it's an earthquake early warning system that was designed to send notifications out to people that have registered. I do know there is some work happening at U of O. I haven't dug in quite yet, haven't had the time, but really focusing in on how can we get people alerted as the earthquake is happening further south or further north. The last couple of things I did want to talk about is volunteerism. So, if you could mute your phone, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I can't read this very well because of the colors, the blue and then the light blue on top. It's very hard to read. Is that something that might be easily changed?
Yes, that can be changed.
But I'm like, come on, balls, put your heart out.
Sorry, pause.
I'm bringing the meatballs apart because honestly, I'm so nervous about serving Chef.
One of the hosts can mute that person.
There we go. It felt kind of
It's up
like
to
in line
Charles.
specifically.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I tried.
Well, I'll keep talking because I know what the slide says. So volunteerism, right? We want to think through how can we connect to folks that are interested in this same topic here in Eugene. I am a firm believer in the CERT program, and we've opened up our first Thursdays. We actually have one coming up this Thursday night out at Second and Chambers. It's open to the community, emergency training where you can meet some of our CERT volunteers and talk about the program. We're also doing a CERT Basic Academy next month. I want to say it's the 2nd or 3rd week of March. I think they're working out details this evening. Actually, I missed that tonight to be here with you all. American Red Cross has a disaster services program if you're interested in the sheltering side of things or learning how Red Cross responds to emergencies and supports local governments. You can also enroll in some of those specialized trainings. So having that basic first aid and CPR training, understanding the stop the bleed training. We just did that last month for our CERT folks. It was kind of a quick and dirty stop the bleed training. But I think that those are the two that I know of that are offered pretty regularly here in our community, but there are tons of different things you can do. Next slide, please. And lastly, I did want to provide my contact information. I know Trisha wanted to provide hers as well as the emergency management website. We have been actively working to update our website with more critical information and some of implementing some of the lessons learned that we had over the ice storm the last couple of weeks. So we're hoping to do a community publication based around individual preparedness and some of the considerations for our populations with access functional needs. So we'll be working within our division here, as well as within the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion office just across the street from us. So do you have any questions for me on the emergency preparedness side or for Trisha on the transportation planning side? I guess I could check the chat.
Yes, there are going to be lots of questions.
Yeah, I've been keeping list of the ones that came in through the chat, at least the.
Can I start out by saying
go
that one of the things, and this has to do with the bridges and the overpasses, one of the things we were very clear about wanting, and that's why the title says the seismic safety of the bridges and overpasses in the Northwest region, is to actually hear by identifying the infrastructure being discussed, which I understand might be the city's responsibility, the county's responsibility, or the state's responsibility. We need to know in the Northwest region what the current status is of those bridges and overpasses, which ones are going to be retrofitted, and what we need to do to maybe add to that list. In River Road, for instance, we're pretty landlocked. If the bridges and overpasses were to fail, we would have no way out of our neighborhood to speak of. And there'd be no way people could get in. So that's what I had hoped this presentation would focus on.
No,
Who said?
well, it's not.
I'm sorry, Deborah, could you please let
Sorry.
Trish respond?
You want to take the questions that address the Northwest neighborhoods first?
Well, can someone please respond to, yeah, that would be one thing, but the question I'm asking is, can we please zero in like on the Chambers overpass, for instance?
Yeah, we can talk about that one. So the Chambers Overpass is going to start into construction in probably March or April. And so that'll be seismically upgraded. That's the one going to the railroad tracks between 2nd and Roosevelt. And that project will last about 9 months, and then it'll be seismically stable in the event of a cascading event, or in the occurrence that we get an earthquake of that magnitude, it will still be standing.
So that's a very key one for our region, obviously, because people will hopefully be able to get out of the neighborhood if the roads are usable or aid can get through. Was part of the research you did for this presentation, did it include, for instance, the Beltline area?
So all of those are going to be on our ODOT jurisdiction, so I can follow up with them and see if they've done any evaluations or what the
Well, right, that was what I had hoped we would also be covering, as well as Maxwell, the Maxwell Bridge, which I know is the county. What is the status of that?
I'll have to get back to you on that one as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So I apologize for not having that prepared. I will,
yeah,
I will get back to you on both of those.
And one other question, I'm sorry, and then I'll let other people ask their questions, but these were kind of key. There's been a number of questions about the pedestrian and bicycle bridges going over the Willamette. Are they seismically retrofitted, or are there plans to do that?
So pedestrian and bicycle bridges are not going to be a priority at this point. No, the vehicular bridges, being able to maintain emergency services and get people in and out of town is going to be the highest priority. And then we'll start to evaluate if there's opportunities to do pedestrian bridges. There are some that can carry the load of emergency vehicles. And so those ones will be the highest priority, as opposed to like a 5-foot wide bridge that only pedestrians go across, because that's not going to provide as much function overall to the network as opposed to something that can carry a vehicle.
Okay. Are there other projects that the city is involved in the Northwest region that we need to hear about tonight?
Not specifically as it relates to bridges, no.
Well, okay.
Well,
And I apologize that that's not the, I know that's not the answer you're hoping for, and But this is, we started this in 2020, and so it's a relatively new program, and the process in order to get funding, in order to get construction is not fast. So a lot of the funding that we receive is like a 2 to 3 year process from the point of submitting applications to actually having the funding to be able to start into design and then work towards construction. So since we've started approaching or applying for funding in 2020 and have started receiving that, we have 4 projects that are getting close to being able to start construction. So we're making really good progress and continuing to look at opportunities outside of just our normal funding sources to expand and accelerate construction of these bridges or getting them seismically upgraded.
Mhm.
Can I ask a question? Has there been any studies to determine what shape our roads will be in after a Cascadia earthquake?
We have not, no.
Okay, isn't
And
there?
there's a lot of factors that go into that. It's not just the road prism, like what you drive on. It's not just the asphalt. It's everything that's underneath it. So we have pipes under our roads that are over 100 years old. And if those fail, then we're going to have a void where that road's going to come down. But if the pipes hold, then there should be localized cracking in the asphalt. But I wouldn't anticipate that we're going to have large scale, roads breaking apart or falling apart. Now, when you get into steeper sections or like the South Hills or areas that are built on clays, you may see more of that cracking from just the soils expanding. And that's going to be the biggest issue for us is the contraction of the soils.
Thank you. How do
So,
you want to do this, Charles? Should
Well,
I just start down the list, or?
Duncan Rhodes has his hand up, so maybe we can start there. And
What about the questions in the chat? Could we start with those?
Okay, well, I finally got myself unmuted. Well, it looks to me like we're not paying too much attention to the non-vehicular modes of travel, and assuming our roads are smoked after a Cascadia subduction event, we're going to be relying a lot more on foot traffic and bicycle traffic. How is everything going to stand up for those modes of transportation?
Oh, that's a great question. But I think it's more than just the roads, the bridges. I mean, there's going to be buildings that are going to come down, and there's going to be infrastructure that's not standing once this is done that are going to impact roads, even if the road would be accessible or available for use. So it's a tough question to answer of what it's going to look like after, or how we rebuild our network, or what it's going to look like immediately after. I know there's ongoing discussions about how to best approach this and what we're going to do after, but I'm not entirely sure how to best answer your question, Duncan.
Well, I think we ought to leave some room for other modes of transportation to be in a supporting role, because cars may not be able to get down the road, but a bike probably would.
Yeah, that's a great point. I can follow up on that as well and talk with some of our staff that work more in the emergency management group, or Sierra, if you have information about that and could add. Otherwise, I'm happy to follow up and see how our bike network and ped network is going to be maintained after an event.
The only thing I can think of that would differ a little bit, I believe Oregon Department of Transportation did a bridge study. I want to say, what was it, 2020 or 2021? I can't fully remember. It was right before I left for Montana, but they had done a study, I think either of their bridges, or I don't think it was every single bridge in Oregon, but that information should be available. You could Google it, I'm sure, if it exists on the ODOT website.
okay, Joel, do you want to take the chat questions? And
Yeah. One of them was about federal infrastructure funds, and you answered that 90% of it is federal. And then one of the questions was, what is the average age of the bridges chosen for retrofit?
Yeah, they're in the 70 to 80-year-old range.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So it's old infrastructure, and they use different codes back in those days. So they didn't necessarily have to evaluate based on seismic conditions compared to what we have now. So as the code changes, we're trying to bring them up to current code.
So once they are brought up, they'll be seismically fit for the earthquake. Okay.
Right. And we're also evaluating based on the age, does it make sense to do a retrofit compared to a replacement? Because if we're going to retrofit something that's only got 10 years of life left in it, it makes more sense to replace it.
Yeah. There was a question about what about Northwest Expressway where it goes under the belt line? Biggest question is what evacuation route would be available? I think that would be big for River Road.
Yeah. I think that's a question I need to follow up with
Road
ODOT.
and Beltline.
Yeah.
Yeah, finding out whether it's, well, belt line is even seismically set. Okay. Yeah. Why isn't internet access not on the critical service list? Think heavily damaged fiber optic cables.
I didn't hear the answer to that question. It was my question.
He's got to look. He said he has to look into it to find out
Oh.
what the belt line is.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Once this is done, we'll get this information out to everybody. Let's see. And then another question was about the airport runways. We had heard there was some work done to them to make them a little bit more resilient, but I'm not sure if that was the intent. Do any of you guys know? No.
So I'd just like to chime in and say a couple of these questions are interdivisional. So there's different divisions within the city. And I know there are active conversations going on around cybersecurity during a Cascadia collapse. And my understanding is that at some point there's going to be a list around critical and non-critical infrastructure and how that would be handled in an event that there is an earthquake. So there are measures being taken internally. And we're happy to follow up with people that are designated to, excuse me, come up with those plans. And yeah, we're happy to get back to you with those answers once we hear more.
There's a question about 30th Avenue as a lifeline for South Eugene. There's another, is the overpass at Highway or Interstate 5, I guess, secure. Also, there are 2 deep ravines that were filled in to create the roadway. In a major earthquake, could those infills slide down into the golf course? You probably.
I could talk a little bit about the 30th Avenue Bridge. We had an evaluation on that bridge done last year, and it's not seismically stable. We're continuing to evaluate if that is one that we're going to retrofit or replace. But it would be after the list of 10 that we're currently working through. And I can't speak to the ravines if that would go into the golf course.
Yeah. Well, here's a good one. Is there a city focus on road bridge access to the area hospitals now outside the city of Eugene in case of emergency? I'm not sure what that meant, but now that we've got the hospital on the other side of the river, we don't have one in Eugene anymore. Yeah, it's pretty important that something happens to allow us to get across the river somewhere.
Absolutely. And I think that question would be best answered by ODOT, understand if those bridges are seismically stable.
Yeah, I think that's something that I believe our city councilors and that are looking at too, just because in fact, I think it's even at the state legislative level. So anyway, hopefully we get more done on that. How do you determine if the infrastructure is seismically stable?
Yeah, so we take the as construct drawings, which have all the components of the bridge, all the rebar that's running through it, and build a 3D model out of that. And from there, we can apply different forces to it, which would mimic an earthquake, and determine if it's going to fail or not. From that evaluation, we can then start to figure out what the fix is. How do we make it seismically stable? But a lot of them are hard, are just going through math and getting a printout at the end of 200 pages that talk about each element and if it's going to fail, is it okay? And that is normally we have a consultant do that. So when I say we, it's not necessarily the city folks that do that, but we have consultants that will perform that work for us.
What level of earthquake are they planning for here in Eugene?
So we build or we design them for the 1,000-year event. But they
Right.
also use a life cycle criteria, which says if any component of the bridge fails during a seismic event, the entire thing fails. So we build them so that the entire structure will be still standing at the end of that the shaking.
But they talk about a level 9 or 9 on the Richter scale off the coast. And they're saying here, what I understood was it's going to be much less. And I was just wondering what criteria you're using to, are you looking at a 7 here? Are you looking at,
I'm not sure how it converts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the code doesn't speak to Richter scale, it just talks about here's the intervals and here's the oscillation that you should anticipate within your structure.
Okay. It just seems like it would be a different, different amount of shaking depending on how severe it is. All right, moving on. Okay. Based on the list you showed regarding the length of time we expect to be without critical services, why do you suggest a 2-week prep period? And what would be a more appropriate, realistic time frame to prepare to be self-sufficient? I think maybe that's a Sierra question there.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Get Jordan off the hot seat for a second.
You can take a break and get it.
Now's your chance, Jordan.
Right.
So yeah, I think that the intention of the 2 weeks ready preparedness period is it's a manageable expectation, right? It's an approachable way to get folks started in the preparation process. I think what realistic time frame to prepare for, I mean, we could be without services for 3 to 6 months, right? Depending on the severity of it. And while I understand the transportation issue, all the community lifelines would be beyond damage. Like I think that's the other piece of this. Like we are hyper focusing on bridges. And that's a transportation issue, but there are 8 community lifelines, right? I mean, we're looking at something very severe, like uncontrollable fires, no wastewater or water pressure. Like I said, widespread hazmat, dam failures, no food or resources. Like the likelihood that Eugene wouldn't be underwater with dam failure is in the Cascadia level, like catastrophic earthquake, right? I think we're hyper focusing in on bridges, and I just want to reiterate the impacts to the critical infrastructure. So I see questions about internet access and things like that. I mean, that's very far down the list of priorities because in emergency response, we prioritize life safety. And you should be able to care for yourselves in the event of a Cascadia earthquake, and the state is expecting up to 2 weeks, but your realistic time frame is really dependent on what you're able to do. Can you be self-sufficient for 2 weeks, or do you need to consider how are you going to get out? How are you going to get to family? How are you going to get out of the area? Do you have family out of the area, or is everybody on the west coast of Oregon? It's just really dependent on a lot of factors. So.
Okay, thank you. Should we assume bridges, overpasses that are not retrofitted will be impassable? Back on the hot seat, Jordan.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that. So our approach after this event is going to be to bring out, well, either internal or consultants that will evaluate each structure and determine if it's passable or assume that it's safe to drive over. And so that's very conservative, assume yes, but I don't know if that's realistic. I haven't lived through one of these events. I'm not sure,
No.
and I don't want to put fear in people that everything's going to be crumbled, but I also can't say everything's going to be standing.
Right, right.
Can I interject a question? Does ODOT, the county and the city get together and discuss the viability of this infrastructure that that all of you are responsible for in light of how to protect the citizens? Is there a coordinated discussion that goes on in planning?
All right.
So- Sorry, I can at least comment on the funding side of things.
Okay.
We're always trying to collaborate with Lane County. So for instance, we're in the process of applying for some federal emergency management funds. I believe it's the end of this year to help retrofit some bridges that have collective ownership. And so those conversations are very active. And there are times when there has to be prior approval from ODOT or Oregon Emergency Management in order to procure those funds. So yes, we do have active conversations with ODOT, Oregon Emergency Management, Lane County. They're all active participants of managing any sort of funding process that's in place federally too. So yeah.
And I do want to respond to Sierra's comments that this is hyper bridge oriented. It doesn't need to be just bridges, but that was the subject that we often come up against because we think in terms of how do we get across the river to a hospital, et cetera, et cetera. It's a reasonable question, I think, for us to be asking. It's not meant to exclude that there are other priority issues that we also need to have meetings about. But so, that's been the subject of this meeting for a lot of months. And it remains that we are concerned about how we're going to fare, not even just in an emergent or earthquake, but a major flood, anything like that. We need to know more about the infrastructure. And also, I'd just like to add that in the readings I've done, there is an emphasis on now's the time to do the retrofitting and be prepared so that when the event occurs, you're not looking at a bunch of bridges that have not been retrofitted. So again, I think I understand the impulse to want to focus on other aspects of emergency, but we would like to know what is going to happen to make the momentum of doing the retrofitting increase. Is there a way in which the community's voice can be taken into consideration in that process?
And great questions, and completely understand where you're coming from. They are critical for us being able to get in and out of the city. The bottleneck for us is funding. That's the biggest thing. And so there's a couple different programs that we get funding out of. The main one is the local bridge program through ODOT, but they limit how much each region and each agency get, which doesn't allow us to progress faster. We would love to be able to do more projects, but we don't have the funding. And without that, we're kind of at the mercy of when we can apply for new funding, when there's opportunities. We have looked at other alternatives for funding. So Trish and I are working on a FEMA grant for a bridge replacement, but a lot of those are nationally based. And so our bridges are getting put up against ones that are in major cities, Washington, DC, or Philadelphia, New York. And we're trying to present a case where we deserve money over significantly larger bridges. And it's just a challenge for us.
So it's a political issue.
It's, well, priority and political priority, I
Okay.
guess.
Well, I appreciate your answer. I really do.
Well, I would like to add to that. And so just as I guess a point I wanted to make was there's a fine line between competitive funding and non-competitive funding. And just the pool, like the overall pool of non-competitive funding is so low that every time we apply for federal grants, unfortunately, there are larger cities with more pressing needs. At least that's how it's perceived by the federal government. And so we're competing, I would say, with 500-600 different competitors across the whole nation. And so there are times when, you know, priorities can be a little different on federal level, but we're always actively trying to look for every opportunity that comes down the pike and are actively applying for it. So,
and a lot of the bridges as well, the funding applications that we go after, we don't meet the minimum threshold for funding. So they want bridges that are in the 50, 100, $500 million range. And our biggest projects are in the $20 million. So a lot of those we're not able to even apply for.
So go ahead.
Thank you. So it seems to me that's really critical to, well, for one thing, to know what evacuation route we would be able to take. And also that, you know, similarly in the reverse, if they need to get in to help us with money or whatever, I mean, not money, food or, you know, whatever we might need, water, that then knowing how, you know, having a route that they could take to get in here would be key. And it would seem to me that knowing whether having those evacuation routes identified and then prioritizing the safety of bridges required to make those evacuation routes work would be essential. And it seems like, you know, the age of bridges, I see how they're thinking that, you know, the age of bridges is what really matters. But if the issue were laid out, that here's a situation in which people, it's going to be a matter of life and death for people to be able to leave, that might be another thing for them to consider in deciding whether to fund bridge fixing projects.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I will tell you, we have some of the best staff that write grants, and even with all the wordsmithing and all of these points that we bring up that our citizens and neighbors bring up, sometimes we just don't get them. And it's really unfortunate because we put a bunch of effort and time into getting funding to improve our infrastructure, and we want to have bridges that are going to last long term, and we want to have infrastructure that is going to be there after the Cascadia event or a large scale catastrophic event. But unless we secure funding, it's challenging for us.
This is where the elected officials that could influence this need to step up for us, right? Aren't we the second largest city in Oregon?
Are we anymore? We still? Who knows?
I see Fred has his hand up.
I have a suggestion. Maybe the Oregon Rainy Day Kicker Fund could be accessed for these kind of projects. We might have to write legislators to ask about that.
I'm not familiar with that, but thank you.
You get the money back from the over. Okay, so what is the city doing to encourage more gathering, warming, shelter places for displaced residents and ways to provide transportation to bring them from homes via any means, perhaps to disperse centers instead of just a few shelters run by volunteers? So I guess if that's in relation to if we have a large, you know, like an event, you know, where, you know, people are going to be set up, like say the fairgrounds or something, how do we get people there too? anyone have a?
So there are a couple of things here. Oregon Department of Health and Human Services, their resiliency division is working on releasing some grant funds. I think the application process, I want to say it's either open or opening for what they call community resilience centers. And it's an opportunity for communities to apply for funding to support resilience efforts, or resilience hubs is what they call them, in their communities. So that is one opportunity for kind of creating more spaces within a community that could potentially survive that kind of shaking. As far as locally, I don't know how to answer this question as it relates to Cascadia, so I will just leave it at what the state is starting to offer.
Okay, let's see, are they going to identify, oh, relates to what Ellie talked about earlier about evacuation routes. And then there's something from, oh, okay, that's the list of bridges. Let's see, down.
While you're looking at that, I wanted to ask, and at the River Road Community Organization a year or so ago, actually, I think, Trish, you may have been the presenter on this. There was a discussion about I guess it's a proposal to do a parallel bridge across the Willamette that would be for multimodal transportation across the Willamette that would run parallel to the existing bridge. Is that going forward, or is that waiting for funding approval, or what is the status of that?
So I believe it wasn't over the Willamette, it was over Beltline Bridge. So we're currently in the process of procuring some more funding. The project is called the River Road Santa Clara Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge. We were also thinking of the name Ruby Bridge initially. So if you're ever interested, you can read more about that on the city's website. I'm happy to drop a link in the chat. But I believe we were able to procure half the funding for construction. And Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the project, is it already in the engineering phase, or?
Well, I think she's asking about the one by Delta Sand and Gravel.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a ODOT project, and I think the holdup for that one is the environmental clearances they're going to have to get in order to build that. Building a new bridge across the river is going to be one challenge in itself, and then you have the aggregate facility there with all their spoils and all their contaminated soils are going to have to be mitigated. I would anticipate that the cost of doing it is going to be prohibitive from them actually completing that project.
Okay. Thea, you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. What has there been any thought or planning in the cumulative impacts of a earthquake, and as far as living downstream in a timbered area where a lot of trees and other debris and mud flow could come down through the rivers and jam up against the bridges? So we're not looking at just seismic stability for the initial shaking, but the long-term impact of what could be a lot of stuff happening there. I know that's probably in nobody's jurisdiction, but I'm curious if it's in the hazard plan, or and also that could reroute the river in the River Road area, Santa Clara area. So that's a concern about log jams and their impact on the bridges and roads around us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, do you have anything from the perspective of the mud flows or debris cleanup?
Nothing specifically, no, for
Okay.
that.
With respect to log jams and that sort of stuff building up around bridges, more than likely it's going to be an evaluation after the fact. We can build abutments and retaining walls around the bridges, but the magnitude of this is going to be something that's going to make more sense after the fact to be able to try and mitigate.
Right, and by the way, when we, or at least when I was formulating the questions and assumptions and expectations for this presentation, of course, we all think of Cascadia events, but I'm aware that it could have been a lesser earthquake. It doesn't have to be the big one. And so again, I think that it's helpful to know what is being planned to allow us to get around in an even lesser dramatic earthquake situation. So I'm hoping we did get answers to these questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Trish sent me the list of questions and the ones y'all have provided. There's a lot of follow-up for us.
Right.
And
Mhm. Yeah.
I actually have a meeting later this week about debris cleanup. So we have contracts for one company that's going to be managing the cleanup effort, to be debris cleanup, and then another that's actually going to be performing the work. And that's all work that's reimbursed by FEMA. And so after that meeting, I should be able to provide additional information with respect to how we're going to clean up mud flows, how we're going to clean up roads and streets and bike paths. So we'll get back to you with answering a lot of these questions. It's just going to take a little more research.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
that would be great. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's still a couple here,
Good.
but
Okay.
go ahead and Carlos has his hand raised.
Yeah. Carlos, you want to?
One thing I'd like to point out is that the city's already said that in a major earthquake, the sewer system and water supply lines will be disrupted probably for a significant period of time. The what's not being talked about is what the implication of that is. People are not used to living without flush toilets and without supply of fresh water. Without these systems, it's very likely that we would shortly be in the grips of a cholera pandemic. So as such, I think that it's critical to pay attention to evacuation routes, because if in order to forestall a pandemic of cholera, it would be virtually necessary to virtually evacuate the entire population of Springfield and Eugene.
Well,
Here's another question. It relates, in the event of a CSC earthquake, would dam failure also be possible concern for bridges? I suppose it's a concern, but I think what we saw, in our bridge or our dam presentation last year, was that they thought that the dams would be okay, but nobody knows for sure. But I don't know if you guys, Jordan or Trish, or have anything to add to that? Maybe not.
Okay. I can talk a little bit to that. So we don't do modeling with the anticipation of like a dam failure or to that scale of having a tsunami come over the mountain and then it's in Eugene. So we don't, that's not part of our design criteria. So we would not be able to design prior to the event happening and be prepared for if this size water flow comes through that we're going to be standing after, or we're going to have a bridge that's going to be stable after. And that's not to say that it wouldn't be, but that's not something that we account for in our design.
right.
And then the last one I think I have, unless there's some more added to the chat. If bridges were compromised, how would people on the west side of the river get to the hospital, which we sort of talked a little bit about, and how would aid from the airport get to the east side of the river? That is quite a good question. I don't know if there is an answer for that.
There are a few landings across the river. Might be able to maybe shuttle a few vehicles across on a ferry or something.
Oh yeah.
That reminds me that I have heard that that there are actually temporary or inflatable or bridges. Maybe Ed Farron, do you know about this? That there are emergency bridges that can be set up in those circumstances? Ed?
I happen to have a friend who's a military enthusiast. I'll ask him.
Yeah, no,
No, there are temporary bridges, but they're not anything that you would cross the Willamette, I don't believe. You know, it's a military thing, you know, like fairly like crossing Amazon Creek or something like that is possible. But and then you can plop down a railroad flat car. I've seen that used to cross creeks when I worked for the Forest Service, but like a pretty large, you know, like crossing the Willamette or a large body of water is unlikely on a temporary structure, I think.
all right.
There's another question, or not a question, maybe a statement, maybe related to the ferries. Maybe we should focus on a site for a ferry across the river, and if the Beltline Bridge project is really 10 years out. And Thea said we could make a Cajun Navy. I'm not sure what that is, but
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you never know what the river's shape is going to be in either. Okay, here's
Lena has her hand
oh,
raised.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi, I'm Lena. Well, one of my big concerns is access to medical care and hospital, like even just not even with a potential Cascadia, even ice storms and like various things where people can't get across the river. To have second largest city without a hospital is quite a shift. And just over the last week, I've had 4 friends in the emergency room that needing admitted on high flow oxygen on gurneys and hallways for days, just over the last week. So I think that is an impact. And in an emergency situation, where are people going to go? Are there going to be supplies here? I've also had 2 medical providers that are moving from South Eugene over to the other side of the river. So it's like access is becoming less and less for medical care just on a general basis, let alone in an emergency situation. As far as like the airport, and I don't know if this is still a case or true, that the 30th Avenue over by LCC at one point was designed to land planes. I don't know if that's kept up for that or if that's just a secret military thing for some time in the long past when they built that. But helicopters also have different landing capabilities for getting supplies in and out as well. But there may be other options that we're not aware of. So just a couple thoughts. But yeah, is the city working on something as far as access to medical care, medical supplies, emergency supplies, you know, where people would gather if we can't get across the bridges to the hospital? And even if we were to get there, it may be so packed that we're in gurneys in the parking lot for days on high flow oxygen. I don't know.
I think it's a good question. Sierra, did you hear that question?
Yeah, I heard the question. As far as access day to day, I think you'll have to talk to the hospital and figure out what their plans are. Talk with Peace Health and get their input. I'm not privy to those discussions of what the plans are for what they're doing. As far as for what the City of Eugene's emergency management team is doing, I haven't seen anything regarding that, but definitely after the ice storm we just experienced, we have had some discussions on maybe talking through some mass care and sheltering planning in a regional sense. Being able to provide the panel and discussion of like how can we meet this need and what efforts we can put forth. I think that's a really big discussion. I do remember hearing something about Oregon Department of Health and Human Services, again, that resiliency division working on some mass care projects. So I think I know that Oregon Health Authority works with local hospitals and local jurisdictions in prepping for training with like triage and like field medical. There are other things happening as far as training and exercising, but I don't know of anything locally here in directly to answer your question.
There's just basically a bunch of statements here. There's not much in the way of questions. Oh, here's something. News may be only through AM broadcast radio from stations east. I guess they mean over the mountain or something, or plus via AM shortwave radio because FRS is too short. Is that? I guess that's to communicate. Village David, I guess that's to communicate to like the emergency managers from people who are outside the area. I don't. It's get a little clarification there. I'm not sure. Anyway, there's something
Well,
about.
I could try to answer that a little bit.
Okay.
As a lot of us know, there is a network trying to form of FRS radios to use as the boots on the ground to connect with other higher powered radios and then to get messages to the hams who can relay them to the Emergency Operations Center of the city. And that's going on and ongoing practices. And actually they activated during the ice storm for 4 days and had a repeater available and people relaying some messages there. And we encourage anybody to try to go to eugenemcom.org and learn about the Citizens Volunteer Eugene, EMCOM network, emergency communications, and build up of their local FRS teams and find out how to get the hams involved to start participating in that kind of an incident and to practice for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Thea. We also had John Ian Penn gave a presentation at the Sustainability Commission the other night talking about infrastructure funding currently available from the bipartisan infrastructure law. There may be avenues for transportation funding through that. I think we've got most of the questions. If you have a question that I haven't asked, or yes, just raise your hand and we'll.
Joel, a question was just entered into the chat by Paxton.
Oh, I see it. Fire departments often have evacuation plans. Is anyone working on a central organization group to coordinate all the different emergency problems? There is one. Sierra, maybe you can speak to that. Talk about them.
Hey, Paxton, can you clarify what you mean in your question?
What I have seen is that what I'm seeing is that there's actually lots of plans. The hospitals are doing work, you know. One time I talked with West Lane Fire Chief, and he said the Veneta area on their plans is supposed to take 50,000 evacuees. I'm involved with the Oregon Country Fair, so I was concerned about maybe we could use our lands for helping support that. And that made me realize that the fire departments do a lot of these planning. There's other groups that do a lot of this planning, but there seems to be nobody on the top that's tracking each different group as to what's going to happen. And just an observation of mine, we're, you know, a good 100+ miles away from the actual cascading shake. And so I suspect it's not going to be as severe as one thinks. One should actually go study other places that have had similar problems, you know, in Japan and stuff like this, and see how long it's actually taken to bring back infrastructure, bring back power, you know, bring back people. I think that that needs to be studied also. Thank you.
Thanks, Paxton. What I think I hear you asking is about what does or who is in charge of all of this, right? Well, it can be really difficult. So local jurisdictions are in charge of what they're in charge of, right? And that is in the same respect of emergency management. So emergency management, we are the connectors. We work in our communities on plans. We work on response and recovery efforts to be able to prepare for something like this that could be down the pike. But I think I hear what you're asking is who is looking at every single plan that every rural fire district is doing and every different agency is doing, like our hospitals or a private industry or hazmat locations, like who is coordinating all of that. A lot of that is coordinated through the county emergency management program. So being a city jurisdiction, I am just as much of a participant as any of the other organizations, but the county is really kind of maintaining that overall picture for what they're looking at as far as the different needs of their cooperators within their communities. The other side of things is we do have required plans. So like our emergency operations plan, that is required for our organization, for our local jurisdiction. We are required to have our natural hazards mitigation plan, or at least be a part of the county's plan. And we're also required to have participation in the community wildfire protection plan. You'll notice that none of those specifically called out seismic, but it is really based on resources. So our ability to plan for every little thing is based on the resources that we have in our local jurisdictions. So being able to track every plan that everybody does, it's impossible. Even at the county level, it's impossible. So what our best efforts can do is pull people together to meet, to convene, to talk through what they're working on. And Patience was a master at it. And I'm really excited to see what the new county emergency manager is able to do as well. But being able to pull people together and discuss what efforts are being brought forward. And then on the state level, our state provides us a couple of opportunities to convene as emergency managers and talk through what our communities are doing and find out really neat projects that are going on around the state. And that's at our Oregon Prepared Conference and then our Oregon Emergency Managers Association Conference. So 2 times a year we get together before and after wildfire season, we like to say. But that is really another opportunity where we convene and see what's going on. Oregon Department of Emergency Management has regional coordinators. And those regional coordinators are kind of our liaisons to the state projects, what's going on and what kind of resources we can expect coming down from our state partners. And kind of their expectations and priorities, right? So what's their focus? Are they really focused in on earthquake, or are we kind of shifting more towards preparing for wildfire season? All of that to say, yes, there are coordinators, and emergency managers are usually the people that they are. But as far as for maintaining a span of control, we really can't go to the hospital and say, you have to be doing this. And we can't go to our rural fire districts and require them to do anything without giving them either the resources to do it or the partnership to facilitate. Facilitation is a huge piece of our successful planning. And I hope that kind of in a roundabout way answers your question. But it really starts at the top, and I hate to call out FEMA, but they set our national priorities, and everything kind of rolls downhill down to the local jurisdictions. And FEMA likes to remind us emergencies begin and end locally. So it's our responsibility to start the planning process, but it's their responsibility to kind of set the strategic vision of what that looks like. So there's that
Thank you.
answer. I think I got there.
One other thing that has come up here is related to communications, and especially related to people who don't have hearing or have hearing issues. How are they going to, get information? How just maybe in general, how is everyone going to get information? It's probably going to be through like AM radios, or if they don't have access to a ham radio or some other method. What's the city's plan for that? The communications end of things.
What's Jordan's question? I'm just
I suppose I could answer.
go ahead.
We had talked about the idea of neighborhood hubs, have like a church or something where the community can get together and and bring information about what happened recently to this community hub, and people can then post it onto a job board, a literal job board, things that need to be done, and people can go out and do the task to the best of their ability, and then come back and report on that. It's like you write up a ICS 213 maybe, and has a job that needs to be done. You stuff that in an envelope. Hold on. Stuff that in an envelope. Put it on a magnetic clip like so, and boom, mount that on the job board.
Yeah.
And people can just get things done. That makes sense?
That's great. What I'm looking at is more so the everyday bit of, if you're sitting there at home and you don't know what's going on, how do you find out the information? Like through the radio station, through, they might not be available, who knows? But I don't know if the city has looked at what happens if there's no communication system available, radio or television. How are you going to communicate with your residents?
I see no better way than to get out of doors and go to your community hub.
Yeah, but not everybody can get out, because they're, especially
have
people that are older.
They can visits to people's, making door-to-door visits, checking on people. That's
I know we're gonna have to try that, but okay.
Yeah, and my understanding is that there are communities, I think Portland may be one. We have a recent volunteer come to us from Portland. She's a CERT, and she's participated in a huge network evidently up there of hubs probably and so on. And we don't have, well, certain neighborhoods are more organized than ours, but it's not a uniformly administered program here that I'm seeing. So looking at best practices from other places, it would be great if maybe the city emergency preparedness or emergency management office could eventually lead us in something like modeling that and getting prepared. But some neighborhoods are ahead of us in that regard.
Imagine how much more, we have enough, we have
Yeah.
5 minutes left. You want to wrap up? Or
Maybe we should just wrap it up at this point. And I've found this discussion and the questions to be very interesting. This I'm looking forward to getting some answers to some of the questions that are still hanging with regard to the infrastructure and seismic retrofitting, so that we might have more opportunities, assuming that there are roads that are usable at all, to actually be able to get across overpasses and bridges. And I do appreciate the work that went into giving us the answers that you did have. Let's see, Jordan, I can provide you with another write-up that I have from last September that might also help identify some of those questions that we still want feedback on. If you are on our listserv, that's great. You'll get any follow-up information that we have as a result of this meeting. If you're not, please do write us and we'll add you to the listserv. Really appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. And thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Trish. And thank you, Jordan, very much. Is there anything you want to say, Joel, in closing?
No, I think we said it all, and I think everyone probably wants to go home or eat dinner or whatever.
Okay, well, let's see. I've got to, that's about it, I guess. Thank you very much, and we hope to have another presentation in April, possibly about wildfire preparedness, but we'll get back to you on that. So
Thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you. Really appreciate the meeting.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
You're welcome.
Thank you.